I'm Michael Cockerell, and I've spent years unmasking our leaders, interviewing and profiling the great and the good, and sometimes the not so good, of British politics for BBC TV. I've made films about many prime ministers, and others who were the best prime ministers we never had. And here, I'm looking back on my film, A Very Singular Man, all about the controversial Tory Prime Minister, Ted Heath. Ted Heath was a very difficult guy to sort of really get on terms with. I remember once when we were filming him, and he said, "Do you have the usual list of boring questions?" I'd interviewed him a number of times before, and I said, "Yeah, I'm afraid so." The interview went rather better than usual. And afterwards I said, "Do you think the questions were as boring as you?" He said, "Oh, yes, but infinitely more irrelevant today." Another time he said, "I've been thinking about you." Really? Do you have any training for this?" I said, "No." And I said exactly the opposite of what I do. I said, I don't talk to anyone. I don't read any press cuttings. I don't look at parliamentary recordings or other. I just come in and sit down and ask the first question that comes into my head. And he said, "Oh, that would account for it." And I told this to his private secretary. He said, "Oh, well, if he's rude to you, it means he likes you." Funny chap. I remember there was a great BBC presenter who was also a professor of politics and was known for the swingometer. He was called Bob Mackenzie. And he once said to me, "Imagine what it would be like if there were videos of Gladstone and Disraeli." And I thought, that would be fantastic, wouldn't it? Because there's not even any recordings of either Gladstone or Disraeli, apart from one sort of 10-second thing in 1895 of Gladstone. So we don't know what their body language were like. We don't really know what their accents were like. And I thought I will try and make a shelf of tomorrow's Gladstone and Disraelis, and that's how it all started. I remember Peter Mandelson once came up to me at some party. You only knew that Peter was in the room because there was a sudden chill in the air, and he said to me, "You do the most important thing that you can do with a politician, Michael." I said, "What's that, Peter?" He said, "You make them appear human, and then disseminated." Just as I was going to say, it might be difficult with you, Peter, but he was gone, leaving only the slightest tang of sulphur. But the thing is, that was a spin doctor's take. You make them appear human. I try to get the human side out, that which two men in suits shouting at each other doesn't necessarily manage to achieve.
If Ted had asked me to marry him, I should have considered it a great honour.
And would you have said yes?
Well, if I hadn't been in love with someone else.
Did you ever think of asking Maura Limpany to marry you?
I never discussed these matters at all.
Ted Heath was notorious for refusing to answer questions about his private life. And one of the things we do is we take the person we're making the film about to various parts of his life, so his school or her university, or back to Parliament. And Ted Heath was born and brought up in Broadstairs. And so we arranged to film him in Broadstairs. And I remember he arrived in front of one of the best hotels in Broadstairs. And as he got out of the car, he said, "Smell that air, best air in the world." And he suddenly was a different person. He was relaxed. He was in Broadstairs. The sun was shining. And I said we would have lunch before the interview. And he said, I'll have smoked salmon and asparagus and sauce hollandaise, and I won't drink as it's an interview. Okay. And suddenly, when we were sitting down in the Grand Hotel in Broadstairs, with the sea behind him, he was a different person, and he opened up in an extraordinary way, and he looked different, and he talked about personal things in his life which he'd never talked about before, and it was I thought that I made a real breakthrough with him, but the next time he'd gone back into his shell. Very, very odd, but it's often a fascinating way of trying to get people to open up. You take them back to a place which has meant something in their lives.
Heath would escort Kay Raven to the glittering regimental ball of the Honourable Artillery Company. He'd stayed in the army as a territorial and had been made commanding officer of the HAC. What happened? Why did you not get married?
Because she decided she'd marry somebody else.
And what, do you think she was tired of waiting?
Well, I don't know. We won't discuss that.
Why not?
Well, because I don't want to discuss the private lives of people who are either with us or be embarrassed, or no longer with us and it embarrasses their family.
But were you sad when you learnt that
Yes.
she married someone else?
Yes.
Did you get over it, do you think?
Yes.
Has it said that you kept her picture by your bedside for a long
Yes.
time thereafter?
Yes.
Did you?
Yes.
His best friend from school said there were always rumours, was Ted Heath gay? And this guy, Kenneth Hunt, said there are people who say he was gay, but he was chief whip. And as chief whip, you're responsible for the moral welfare of the party, apart from anything else. And in the 50s, when Ted Heath was chief whip, homosexuality between consenting adults was illegal, and he saw what that could do to your political career. And I think, what do we know about him? We know he loved his mother. We know he never got married, and there's no evidence at all of him actually being gay. But one of his own private secretaries, who is himself gay, said that he thought that Ted was a gay man, but sublimated it all his life. And I think there's something in that, but no one really knows. He loved music, and if there were real problems and difficulties, he would go, and he had his grand piano in number 10. He would go and play music, and that was a way of dispersing various different pressures that there were on him. Prime Ministers are remembered normally for one great thing that they've done. And Ted Heath had managed to does a Prime Minister make the weather? Ted Heath made the weather at that time because he did what he always wanted to do, was to make sure that Britain became part of the European Common Market, the EU. And he took us into the EU. And for a long time, that was a legacy of Ted. But now, of course, that last big legacy of Ted was turned on its head. And so he was the man who took us into Europe, and Boris was the man who took us out of Europe. So how much of a legacy does he have? He had great difficulties, especially in 1973, and he took on the miners, and we had the 3-day week and the power cuts, and it was a terrible time. And Ted Heath called an election, trying to have an election. Who rules Britain? The government or the miners? And he lost. Really, it was a very difficult time for him because everything seemed to go against him.
You had no doubt, after that second defeat in '74, you had no doubt that Ted should go.
I had no doubt at that time. It was such a pity that he retreated from things that he believed in, but we did learn a lot from that retreat, and I felt that he should go. But it must, have been a terrible shock to Ted when on the first ballot I got more than he did, quite a lot more. It really must. And he did pull out with great dignity then. But he must have been very hurt.
Was she right?
Lady Thatcher's entitled to her own views.
I think Ted Heath never recovered from the fact that Mrs. Thatcher beat him for the Conservative leadership after 10 years of him being Tory leader and 4 of them as Prime Minister. And he went into what was called the longest sulk in history. And someone said to him, why do you think it is that Mrs. Thatcher doesn't seem to like you? And Ted said, don't ask me, I'm not a doctor. But this longest sulk in history went on for 30 years until he wrote his memoirs. And I went to the launch party of his memoirs, and the first thing that Ted Heath said was, "Good evening. The sulk is over." Everyone laughed. He did have a good black sense of humour. When Ted had to leave Number 10, I remember one of the poignant pieces of film at that time was when his Steinway grand piano was taken and rolled out of Number 10, and the musical Prime Minister, who never quite hit the right notes with the public, was gone. I found out what Ted Heath thought of the programme. He never said it to me, but one of the people in his house who looked after the house said that he'd actually really rather enjoyed it because he hadn't been asked questions like that before. And I know that a guy called Sir Robert Armstrong, who became the cabinet secretary and was one of Heath's lifelong friends, after he saw the film that we made, he said, "I like the film." I said, "I found it very difficult to get anything really out of him." He said, "You got more out of him in that 50 minutes than I have in 50 years of friendship."